consultant, municipal electoral systems expert with Watson and Associates. He will be providing some information on the Loyalist Township Council composition and the ward boundary review, which is just starting to get underway. And he will be coming in shortly. Good evening, Dr. Williams. Can you hear us?
I can hear you. Yes, thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us this evening, and the floor is yours if you wish to go ahead with your presentation.
Thank you, and I'll assume staff will handle that for me. The presentation, I hope, is fairly straightforward for everyone, but we're reviewing this for the benefit of the community as much as for council, but I'm happy to elaborate on some of these as we get going. The main point tonight in the first two slides are just obviously introduction to the process. Just to be clear, my role in this is as what we might call a sub-consultant with Watson and Associates. I've worked with the firm off and on for probably a dozen years. We've collectively done 30 or 35 ward boundary reviews of varying degrees of complexity, and we're very pleased to have this chance to work with Loyalist Township. It has some special challenges, and I hope that we can help the community visit this question with some success at the end. So the next slide will basically just be like an agenda for tonight. I want to introduce the review itself, what it looks like, what it amounts to. This is a new process for the municipality, and I suspect for a good part of your staff, although your CAO was involved with us in a similar review in another municipality, most of the rest of the staff, and I assume council, is new to this, so it's important to tell you a little bit about what we have in mind. We'll talk a little bit about the particular situation in Loyalist Township that underpins, sorry, the review itself, and then explain a little bit about the next steps. And as the mayor has pointed out, this will start as tomorrow night, actually, with some public consultation. So the next slide is basically a big picture perspective where the kinds of questions that we will be addressing, maybe not in this overt way, but they're woven into the work we're doing. And the first point, of course, will be to try to work out how the present electoral arrangement in Loyalist measures up, or whatever we're going to talk about what that might mean. But we want to look at it in comparison to your neighbors and other municipalities and think about whether it has achieves the things that it's intended to achieve, which is beyond electing 5 members of council. Another topic involves the current wards themselves. Do they deliver fair representation, and are they conducive to good government? We address some of these points in materials that are soon to be available through the website, and I'll flag that term fair representation because those of you who were involved before the last election will know that that term was used in a petition that went to council in 2022. We'll also talk a little bit about the goals of the ward boundary review. It's a process that on the face of it looks simple, but has a number of implicit and explicit goals that we need to be clear about, so we're all, in a sense, working toward the same end. And then the last one, which we may not get to tonight, but we will work through staff to determine what information council needs to make an informed decision, because as we'll see in a moment, council is the body that will make this decision, and our priority is to give council the information it needs to make a decision that can be sustained in the event it's appealed, or simply to satisfy members of the community that council is making this decision with the right kind of information available when that decision comes. So the next slide will just remind us of the timeline involved here. The township was established in 1998 out of the 3 municipalities that were amalgamated: Amherst Island Township, Ernesttown Township, and the Village of Bath. The wards created at that time were essentially the replication of those 3 pre-amalgamation municipalities. The 5 councillors there were 5 councillors in that scenario, and they were assigned in a proportional fashion, and we'll talk a bit about that in a moment. Since in the roughly 25 years since that time, there has been population growth in the township, growing from about 14,000, roughly 600, to nearly 18,000 now, at least in the last census. And that increase is a fairly significant one in the composition of the municipality. And as we'll see in a moment, one of the goals of a ward boundary review is to bring the distribution of those seats on council in line with that change. So the 2024, which will run into 2025 ward boundary review, is essentially going back to that original structure and evaluating it and thinking about what alternatives might be there. The goal here is to have this review completed in time to be operative in the 2026 municipal election. To do that, the decision needs to be reached, and in the event of an appeal, it needs to be heard by the end of December of 2025. So we're well ahead of that process, but we're doing it now to make sure that we don't have a scramble, if you will, at the end of this process. So what is the 2024 boundary review? The next slide will give us a couple of points of departure. We use the language deliberately. We're preparing council to consider and discuss whether to maintain the existing ward boundaries or to pursue an alternative arrangement. We provide the advice to council. Council makes that decision. And as I alluded to a moment ago, we provide them with the material to help them consider this carefully. The objectives are set out there as well. Fair representation, so that, and this is a theme that we'll come back to, giving communities an equitable voice in the decision-making process. We're also going to be considering population and demographic changes, starting from the time when the township was created and possibly into the near future. So we need to determine whether the boundaries capture the change that has happened and are suitable for potential changes that may come fairly soon. So it's an evolutionary process. I like to remind people that ward boundaries are not permanent arrangements. They are created at a time for a particular purpose in a particular configuration of the community. As the community changes, it's possible that the wards can be adjusted to meet that. Part of this overall process, of course, is to improve democracy in the broadest sense within Loyalist Township. We're trying to promote transparency and accountability on the part of elected officials, bolstering trust in the democratic system, and increasing civic engagement. I hasten to point out, as we will make clear later on, this is not an evaluation of incumbent members of council. It's basically whether the system in place allows them to perform their role in a way that can be transparent and accountable, or whether there are things in that system that might impede some of those goals. So we're looking at this as a system that is dealing with the reality of the community, not necessarily in a judgment at all of the people who are currently serving in the offices in the municipality. There are a number of materials and interactive tools that have been developed and are to be available through your Engage site to allow the community to become informed about this process and to help us by providing some responses to surveys and other ways to engage in the process. An educational video is already on the site. I will apologize that in some ways it makes it look like this is a great big city we're talking about. Some of the terminology might not quite mesh with Loyalist Township, but the general picture, I think, is accurate. So a ward boundary review is something that you as a municipality can undertake. And the next slide just spells out in very brief form the legislative authority for this. And I know the clerk's report back in April outlined some of this, but for those who have not read that report or not looked at it recently, we're simply summarizing that here. The Act basically authorizes a local municipality working through its council, first of all, to change the size of the council. You have a 7-member council, but the Act simply says a municipal council, a lower tier municipal council, must have a minimum of 5 members, including the head of council. So you have that position, obviously, as the mayor. You have another position as deputy mayor, which is related to your county responsibility, and 5 others. So you meet that requirement. If in the course of this discussion there is an appetite to change that number, and as I said, the minimum is 5. If there is an appetite to do that, and you pass a bylaw to do that, there are no appeals associated with that authority. You can make that decision on your own. Again, we hope we would provide advice to help make that happen. The Act also allows council to decide how its members will be elected, other than the mayor, who must be elected at large. And the rest of council may be elected by what's called a general vote or an at-large system in wards or in some combination of general vote and wards. Now, your scenario, you have a general vote to elect the deputy mayor, you have wards to elect the council members. You could also make some adjustment in that arrangement. And there, again, there are no appeal rights associated with exercising this authority, except, as the third point indicates, if in that process you decided to eliminate the wards altogether. That bylaw, a bylaw to do that, to change the boundaries, to eliminate boundaries, is open to appeal to the Ontario Land Tribunal, and that becomes an important consideration in all of this, that the process and the information could stand up to scrutiny in an appeal. The other side, and I guess the other part of that is all of that, to do that at all, to go through a process is essentially limited, almost limited to what's on the screen. There's no other details there. The Municipal Elections Act, of course, has a number of very rigid arrangements, which cover things like the dates of election, the terms of office, eligibility to run for office, how ballots are counted. So there's an interesting contrast between the way an election is run and how the format for that election is established. One of them highly standardized, the other open to modification. And the dates that we're looking at there are the ones that I cited a moment ago. Now, a review of boundaries, assuming that you retain boundaries, and that's a question we can come back to, are subject to what we call a number of guiding principles, and we outline those quickly on the next slide. I'm going to turn this around a little bit because the one that's listed at the top I view as the outcome of the application of the other principles. We're looking at trying to balance the present and future population distribution among the wards. Fairly standard approach. Rep by pop is often a phrase that's used, and that's a practice that we will try to apply in this case. We will also, though, respect established neighborhoods and communities, referred to as a community of interest principle. Try to draw lines around communities of interest rather than through them, for example. We would also respect geographic features and defining natural and infrastructure boundaries. We try very hard not to draw arbitrary lines to create a ward. We would use markers, boundaries, indicators that are already there. You obviously have a special situation with Amherst Island in all of this, but any of the designs that might cover the mainland part of Loyalist Township would be subject in our application to that principle. But the overall package of all of these is what we call effective representation. It's partly ensuring that as a voter, everyone is treated equally. It's drawn indirectly from the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which talks about equality in political terms. It's partly a matter of the workload, the distribution of workload among councillors, that is handled effectively, and the access process between councillors and citizens over the 4-year term of office is one that the system enhances rather than obstructs. So that's a very quick overview of the principles. The next slide is basically comes back to the question of the size of your council and the way it compares to others in your neighborhood, if I can put it that way. On the left, of course, are the key parts. You must have a mayor elected at large. That person also, beyond serving on Loyalist Council, serves on the county council. The deputy mayor is in the same position, elected at large and serving on the county council. And then 5 ward councillors elected in 3 wards, distributed unevenly. 1 person in 1 ward, 1 person in another ward, and 3 in another. The chart there is simply for comparison to give you some indication that a council of 7 members is quite typical in Lennox and Addington, and a little less typical of Frontenac, but not that far off. You're not operating with a different kind of system. The other comparison at the far right side of the screen, of the slide rather, is the variation in whether to use wards or at large. And again, there's a mix of that. And in many cases, if you read that carefully, you'll realize that the wards elect more than 1 member in many cases. And that's another sub-theme in here as to whether the wards are what I might call symmetrical. They all elect the same number, or whether there's variations. So we'll move on from there. This chart I'm going to have to leave you to look at later, because it was trying to give you even bigger picture beyond Lennox and Addington, looking at the distribution in Hastings and in Leeds and Grenville. Again, you'll see that in Hastings, the councils are almost all of that minimum size, a mixture primarily at large. And then in Leeds and Grenville, again, a different kind of a mix. So that's there to help members of the community and council think about whether the number of councillors needs to change. We're not going to prejudge that at the moment. The next slide very quickly is the context for this. We've already referred to the current census population and the way that growth has occurred over time, and of course the ward map itself with the 3 wards. Again, coming back to an earlier slide, based on the pre-amalgamation municipalities. And if you're looking carefully at that Ward 2, some of my point about clear boundaries certainly jumps out. That was one that we would want to think about whether that's the right way to deal with that in future. Okay, the last slide, I know I've got a time limit here, I'm trying to rush through a bit. This is the introductory workshop, obviously, to try to provide the information you need and to begin the discussion, the consultation with the community. And as I said, beginning tomorrow, we will meet with residents live. It won't be a virtual session. There will be, I believe, at least 4 of these sessions this week and next. I will be there next week for 2 of these sessions to provide an opportunity for members of the community to come in and look more thoroughly at some of this material, but also to have conversations with us about some of the things that we would like to find out about your municipality and the way this current system works. So that will take place over the next couple of weeks. There'll be surveys and other materials available. We will then use that material to evaluate the ward boundaries, and I didn't make that point a moment ago, but I would come back to that. First, that we have to look at the current system and how does it measure up in terms of those principles, and that helps us identify things that may require attention. And using that, we would then come up with some alternative ideas, which we will bring back to the community sometime winter, spring, here with some alternatives. Here are other ways of electing your council that we believe would address the shortcomings that are identified, and the community will be invited to engage with us in discussions about those options. and a final recommendation. Two of them at least would come back to council for a decision about all of this, about alternatives rather to the current system. I think those are the only slides in the presentation, so I hope I made it under my time limit, and if not, my apologies. I tried to talk as fast as I could. Anyway, I'm happy to have some questions, and I will be meeting, of course, with all of you virtually or in person to do a more in-depth discussion about your understanding of your current system and your township. So I look forward to that, but I'm happy to jump in with some questions right now.
Thank you, Doctor, for sharing that information. Council, do you have any questions for the doctor at this time? Deputy Mayor?
That's working or not?
The academic literature around board boundary reviews, is there a distinction for the district?
Sorry, I'm not hearing that.
There we go. Can you hear me now, Doctor?
That's great. Thank you.
Can you describe a distinction between a ward and a district? You made note that, for instance, in South Frontenac, they divide into districts. Can you describe, in the literature, what's the difference?
It's strictly terminology. It's a custom, a practice that is there. There's no requirement for that language. Other jurisdictions use terminology like that. For example, in Nova Scotia, they don't have wards, but they have districts. They are essentially the same idea. It's a division of the municipality in which members of council are elected. So that was simply probably a bit of a leftover from an earlier life where I wanted to make sure that they used a different term, but they mean the same thing.
Councillor Broderick.
Thank you, and through your worship. Doctor, I think a lot of the focus seems to be ward. What will your recommendations also look at the composition in terms of numbers as opposed to just the ward boundaries?
The terminology is there in the original request to us to do this work, and you'll see it is a council composition and ward boundary review. Part of that first phase and my discussions with members of council is basically, is 7 the right number for Loyalist? Does that allow you to represent the community effectively? Does it allow you to do the work that's expected of you, to sit on various boards or committees or whatever it might be? As I know that you're part-time. Is that a reasonable number to do the work that's expected? And that's why the comparative information is there. How much are you like the other municipalities in Lennox and Addington? That would mean that maybe you could get along with fewer. Maybe you need to add. We're not prejudging that. We're looking for feedback in the early stage from the community and from you yourselves about how you can handle the work that is expected of you as part-timers as much as anything. There is a discussion paper, as we call it, in the set of resources that talks about the components of a council and how that might have a bearing on the number. In practical terms, we don't like to try to divide this in a rigid way, but if everyone's generally happy with 7, we would probably just go ahead on the assumption that everybody's happy with 7, so we'll work with 5 wards. If we're hearing messages of another kind, either larger or smaller, I suspect we would want to at least report back to you that we're hearing that, and we'll take that into account in drawing up boundaries. So instead of drawing up boundaries to elect 5 councillors, we would draw up boundaries to elect a different number.
Any other questions at this time, council? Being none, thank you, Dr. Williams, for being here this evening and sharing the information, and look forward to working with you at the town halls as well, where we try to spread the information a little further.
Thank you. And certainly encourage members of council to encourage the community to get out to those meetings. And I'll look forward to meeting with each of you individually very soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Just as the doctors leave heading out, we do have a fair number here this evening, so I would just encourage all of you to watch for the town halls and the opportunities to be able to share your information and talk to your friends and neighbors and encourage them to do it as well. We really need the input from the residents to make sure that the council that is decided on at the end of this review does represent the township well, and will be able to represent it in the future as well. So we have a recommendation, Doctor